They exist by virtue of the fact that the universe exists. Mathematical rules are just extrapolations
So we did not
of
create
facts
them.
about the universe.
They exist. We did not create them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not positing subjectivity here. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. Then if those mathematical formulas exist before us,
Right.
they are real, and we did not create them. And that's what we're arguing about justice. It's a real value, not created by the human mind. It's a real value that we discover, we do not create. But if in reality there is no God, then there's no mind prior to the human mind, and we're just creating morality,
Well, look.
which means it's relative.
How else are people supposed to communicate moral language if not by, well, the act of communicating? You seem to be objecting that, well, who says? That utilitarian philosopher, he had to come up with the theory. He had to communicate it and explain it. How else are people supposed to communicate moral language to each other? The fact that people communicate moral theories to each other doesn't mean that those moral theories don't exist prior to their communication. It doesn't make them subjective. It makes them objective, but nonetheless, some of those moral theories don't require the existence of God.
Which one? You got to put one forward. You can't just keep throwing these all out.
Utilitarianism is one. Deontologicalism is another. Virtue theory is another.
Okay, still though, you don't get moral duties and obligations with most of those.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
Moral Platonism is the direction that I would go in if I were you, because you're not taking any of these and really unpacking them. You just keep throwing them out like
Fair
this
enough.
petri dish.
Maybe.
So just take Moral Platonism or one of those, and here's my problem with it. I think it's fairly convincing, because it's still saying that there's some type of justice or standard of moral objectivity outside of us. It's a transcendent type of principle. But you don't need to posit God. Convincing, way more so than subjective morals that are here on this plane. And yet the problem I have with it, which is why it's way more convincing for there to be a God, not Jesus Christ, not the Judeo-Christian God, but just a personal God, which turns out to be the Judeo-Christian God, is because it's still an obligation to who? It has to be personal, not just all-powerful, an all-powerful understanding of good, but a person that you are offending. That's where you get objective values, duties, and morals, where it's a person who's stating these things and saying they are right and wrong, versus Moral Platonism, which is just this broad, general, ethereal, theoretical, pop, justice, pop, goodness. Here it all is, and it's just ambiguous. Do you see the personal need?
Yes, but your moral theory removes the analysis of the content. It doesn't matter anymore whether or not a proposition on its content is good. Now it only matters whether or not God condones it or supports it.
No, false.
Then what's
And
the
that's your straw man that you're wailing away on. Guess what,
what's the
sir?
view?
That's easy to do. I could do that very easily. But that's a straw man. That's not what we're saying.
What's the view then?
What we're saying is real simple. It takes a human mind to create right and wrong. Bricks, no ability to understand right and wrong. Tree, no ability to understand right and wrong. It takes a mind. If there is no mind prior to the human mind to create and define right and wrong, then it's obviously the human mind that creates it, which means it's all relative depending on which human mind you're talking to.
I explicitly refuted that. I said the mere fact that people communicate moral language to each other does not make it subjective.
Baloney. Why is it wrong for me to hit him? Not because there's some principle out there. It involves personhood. I, a person, am violating him. That's why it's wrong. And for you to argue that it's wrong because there's some esoteric principle out there, I disagree with. I don't feel guilty because I violated an esoteric principle. I feel guilty because this is a person and I violate him in some way.
How do you know why you feel guilty? You know you feel guilty. How do you know why you feel guilty?
Because I have a conscience that convicts me of guilt.
Yes, but how does that get you to the conclusion that, oh, it's God? It must be because of God. You know you
Because
feel
a
guilty.
conscience
It's a
cannot
personal
exist
being.
if there is no God who creates me.
Personal being that you're offending.
How
created.
do you know that that relationship actually exists? You know you feel guilty. How do you get from that point to the leap where I feel guilty because I offended God, as opposed to I feel guilty because there is some objective principle I'm offending? How do you know that the reason you feel guilty is because you're offending God?
Again, the reason I feel guilty is connected to moral objectivities, oughts and shoulds. Let me try and flesh this out then. If we keep getting a log jam, let's try and flesh this out with examples or illustrations, okay? You go with one, I'll go with one. I'll start. True story not too long ago. A man was going to a psychologist and he was cheating on his wife. He was cheating on his wife over and over again. And the psychologist was a client-centered psychologist, basically meaning we're all devoted just to your happiness, not anybody else's. So he kept doing it, and he seared his conscience. Psychologist was agreeing with him. I'm cheating on my wife with a bunch of other women. It's great. One day he comes to the psychologist and says, I can't do this anymore. I don't know where this feeling, this ought, this should, all of a sudden, this objective moral feeling that there's something in the universe that's telling me that this is actually innately wrong and I ought and should not be doing this. He said, if that thing, which is transcendent, he said, did not exist, there would be no moral objectivity and there would be no meaning to my life. Because the moral objectivity question is always connected with meaning. If there is no ultimate right and wrong, then there is no ultimate purpose and meaning to my life. It's all made up, it's all subjective.
So I take it you're familiar with the is-ought problem of David Hume, positive that. So basically what he was saying was, if we live in an empirical world and all we can actually take in through information is just empirical evidence, all of that is instantiated stuff, that's is stuff. How do we get from the is stuff, which is just about factual here and now, to the ought stuff, which is something about it's a counterfactual situation we're positing about what we ought to do in a different situation. So, first of all, it might be an open question that oughts even exist. That might be an open question. I don't agree with that. I think that oughts do exist. The reason why I don't agree that oughts require positing the existence of a God is because if I believe that God's essence or God himself determines the goodness or rightness of things, I've removed the content analysis entirely. Goodness just becomes the decree of God. And that removes all content. It doesn't matter what I say to you, so long as God condones it, that makes it good. That removes the purpose of philosophizing in general.
I agree with that part.
We're not talking about.
But where do you
substance.
get your ought then? Where do you get your moral duties and obligations? Because you brought up a good point in terms of evolutionary theory is posited oftentimes when it comes to morality. But I see a failure there because that still has to do only with our emotions. We've evolved in such a way where I have this emotion that's connected to, I can't do this or that to you because we're part of the same tribe and we're part of the same kin. I think it fails because if there's no moral ought and duty and should. The moral ought, duty, and should has to be connected to a person that is outside of us, a transcendent type of person.
Do you believe that?
Doesn't that make more sense than if it's just a principle? Because I feel no burden to just have this type of live in a certain type of way
and I
offend a
believe in that.
principle.
I do, and I take to that. I subscribe to that framework. It's not impossible to be moral just because you don't believe in God.
Then why not just break it all the time? Why not? What
Because
ultimately
I have
gives you the
moral
motivation to not break it?
I have moral obligations. Are you seriously positing that?
What's the obligation?
How
Who
come,
are you obligated
how come
to?
atheists aren't running amok, killing people all the time?
Because they got
No,
consciences the same way we all do.
That's missing Dostoevsky's point. When Dostoevsky says there is no God, so do whatever you want, all things are permissible, he's not saying atheists are worse than Christians. He's saying understand from a moral obligation point, if there is no moral obligation or objectivity. Nietzsche said the exact same thing. A Soviet guard said the same thing, who he said, I thank you, God, the God who I do not believe in, that I can kill this person right here, right now, because you do not exist. All of them abided by that. But they were never taking the position of somehow atheists are way morally worse than Christians.
Okay. Well, do you believe that it's possible for a person to know, for example, that there doesn't exist such a thing as a married bachelor? That's true, isn't it? A married bachelor. We don't need to consult evidence. We don't need to look out into the world to know that's true. That's definitionally true. That follows from logic. Of course, if I were to tell somebody, person B, hey, you know what? It turns out married bachelors don't exist. The mere fact that I communicated that to that person doesn't mean that it's a subjective fact. It's an objective fact. Where do I get that objective fact from? Do I have to posit that God exists in order to know that?
Yeah, you have to believe that your rational mind tells you the truth about reality. And why do you believe that your rational mind, if it's just a developed monkey's mind, tells you the truth about reality? You have faith that your rational mind, your ability to do logic, puts you in touch with what's true and real. That's quite a step of faith. Now, if you think about it, if there is no God, your rational mind comes from the irrational. Really? That's a gigantic leap of faith. I, as a follower of Christ, understand my rational mind is a gift from a rational being, and it really does get me in touch with reality. That's why I better reason and not lapse into the irrational.
What's your basis for that connection?
And so your whole example of there's no such thing as a married bachelor is simply using reason, logic, and saying it's impossible to be a married bachelor. It's illogical, irrational.
Fair enough. So you make this connection. I have a rational mind. It comes from a rational God. What is your reason? What is your reason for positing that? It can be any reason. Just tell me what the reason is.
The reason that I think it is more reasonable to believe a rational mind comes from a rational mind is in all of my observation of life, I never see reason coming from the irrational or the non-rational. I only see reason coming from rational beings. Therefore, is it more plausible? Is it more reasonable to conclude in the beginning God, the rational, than it is for me to believe in the beginning the irrational? It's a no-brainer. Why? Because all of my experience, all of my observation of reality is reason comes from reason. Reason never comes from non-reason.
Fair enough. So you posit that the connection between your rational mind and God exists and is true because you consult your reason, which itself is predicated on the existence of God, giving a foundation for all reason, which itself is predicated on the existence of God. You're consulting the same evidentiary support, or rather I should say the same justification.
That's a begging the claim fallacy.
It's a begging
No. You just did a great job turning what I said to you into a meaningless cycle. I said to you, my observation is, in life, that reason comes from reason. It does not come from non-reason. Therefore, I've got to ask myself the question, is it more reasonable to believe that human reason comes from a rational being, God, or is it more reasonable to believe that human reason comes from non-reason, no God?
You can't come to that conclusion unless you're using your rationality.
Well,
and what's
the only reason we can have this conversation is because
and what's the justification for consulting your rationality and paying it such deference? Why?
Why?
Yes.
Because my observation is that you can't have, as you put it, a married bachelor. The law of non-contradiction, A and non-A, cannot both be equally true in the same way at the same time. That is my observation of reality. So I've taken my observation of reality, and now I'm asking the question, is it more reasonable for me to believe that my rational mind comes from non-reason, or is it more plausible to believe that my rational mind comes from a rational creator? And sir, that's easy. That's really easy for me. That doesn't take a philosophy degree from UT.
Would you agree that it wouldn't make sense to ask that question if God didn't exist? You couldn't come to a reasonable conclusion, right, without God?
No, it's way less likely to. One, understanding that we simply evolved from highly intelligent monkey minds. Would you trust the mind of a monkey? Secondly, we have evolved in order, whether it's the strong eating the weak, or whether it's somehow just survival of the fittest, that's how we've evolved. We haven't evolved to seek after truth or reason.
Would I trust a monkey mind?
Truth or reason?
I wouldn't trust...
We haven't evolved. We shouldn't even really be having this conversation if there is no God. Because we're simply evolving in order not to seek truth and reason, but simply to survive. We should still be seeking to survive today. And there's a total disconnect between the two.
I wouldn't trust the judgment.
Every good philosopher says that. You brought up a lot of philosophers, so I'm going to say it too. Every good philosopher now, that's recent, in the last couple of years, it originated with Alvin Plantinga. Nobody has been able to discount that yet from a perspective when it comes to God. That's where you get the reason coming from God. He has created us as reasonable creatures. It makes way more sense coming from a guided type of process from God through evolution than no God positing an unguided process only connected to survival of the fittest rather than an ability to reason and seek after truth.
Nobody, it might be the case, maybe, I'm not exactly sure. It might be the case that nobody has been able to discount that view you just put forward. It's also simultaneously true that nobody has been able to posit such a wide-ranging supported thesis so as to prove your point either. There's plenty of things in philosophy that are disagreed on. Plenty of things.
Sure. Well, I don't ever say you can get to proof. Proof oftentimes involves, many will say, science, and proof oftentimes it includes a total lack of consensus on what the word even means. So I would never posit proof, especially when we're talking about philosophy. But let's stay on reason for a second. do you really think, as a society, we could have a well-functioning society, morally speaking, if we all just use reason to weigh in what is truly right and wrong?
Certainly. I think we already do that. I think that is the situation we're in right now.
Okay, let me give you an example then of a humanist at Harvard who lived through a certain prisoner of war camp with Eric Liddell, the great Olympian runner. He went into this war camp as a secular humanist. And he said once he got into this war camp, he trusted all the Americans in this war camp. He said, you know what, we're going to use our reasons. We're going to go about separating rations equally. Then all of a sudden, he had a bunk of 9 bunkmates. Next to him was another bunk of the same size, but they had 11 in there and they were suffocating because 2 did not have bunks. He said, oh, it's okay, we're going to reason ourselves to saying, let's be equal here. Let's have 9 and 9, or if more come in, 10 and 10. Nobody decided to take the choice to be reasonable and morally just to have equal amounts in each bunk. He came back and he said, I am a Christian now. I am a Christian because I believe that it's a heart condition created by a creator who gave us hearts to sacrifice, to love, that are transcendent, ethereal things, not based solely out of reason, that somehow, which I don't believe, came from evolution. I don't think it can come. The seeking after truth cannot come from evolution. So that is why reasoning human beings, we all have sin problems. There's no way we're just going to reason our way to justice. It takes more than that. That's what this Harvard secular humanist, that was his whole point.
Okay, fair enough. Are you under the impression that over time something that changes from another thing cannot have a different attribute than the thing from which it came? So, because I take it what you're saying is, look, you can't get a rational mind out of evolution. I mean, we're talking about apes, not necessarily chimpanzees or monkeys, but apes that existed millions of years ago. They clearly didn't have the kind of sophisticated reason we have. Therefore, how could we possibly have developed from evolution? Is that your position?
No, you're trivializing my position by saying, are you saying that if there is no God, you can't have this? Never once have I said that. Instead, please listen. I use 2 words, most reasonable, most plausible. And I asked you, is it more reasonable to believe that reason comes from non-reason, or is it more reasonable, more plausible to believe that reason comes from a rational being? 100 times out of 100. Not that I can prove it, but in my observation, it's more plausible to believe reason comes from reason, it does not come from non-reason.
Doesn't get to the substance of the question, which is, does objective morality require God to exist?
Okay, well, I think it's time for us to stop, because we have talked an awful lot, and we don't want to beat a dead horse to death more. Thank you so much for raising those issues.
I don't think any of them are correct. Perhaps
None of them are correct, okay.
None of them are correct. Perhaps
Right.
there is a higher force out there beyond us. Perhaps it is an advanced race of aliens beyond our comprehension. Perhaps it is a spiritual God. I don't think anyone on earth has it correct. I don't think I have it correct necessarily. I don't think you have it correct. I don't think anyone here has it correct. And that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Now, did I just hear you say, I don't think anyone has it correct? Did you say that? Mm-hmm. Is that a truth claim? Have you just made a truth claim when you have said, I don't think anybody has it correct?
Well, I don't think anyone has it fully correct. Perhaps.
Okay. Is that a truth claim? I don't think anybody has it fully correct. Is that a truth claim?
Truth be told, I'm not familiar what a truth claim is. Please.
That this is real. This is correct. What you've said is, I don't think anybody has it correct. Have you not made a truth claim?
Well, I think by the statement in of and itself is that I don't think anyone has it correct, so I don't think it is in of and itself a
Okay,
truth claim.
so just listen to what you're saying. I am so intelligent that I realize nobody has it correct. Sir, that is an amazing truth claim. You're saying all the Muslims in the world, all the Jews in the world, all the Hindus in the world, all the Christians in the world do not have it correct. Sir, that is one fantastic truth claim. Now, why do you hold so tightly to your truth claim that nobody has it correct? How do you know that?
Have
That
you been-
nobody has it correct.
Well, Cliff, have you been listening to what I've been saying?
I've been listening to every word of what you've said, in spite of the fact you got interrupted by a guy.
Well, the fundamental reason why I believe that no one has it fully correct is just by studying and examining these religions, seeing the juxtaposition between the loving aspects of, say, Christianity versus the smiting God who turns women into salt pillars. And as I described Christianity, a series of codexes, we see that some stories are of a loving Jesus and others are, of course, turning women into salt pillars. And really, just by studying all of the various religions, you see that, well, which one stands out? Which ones do not? Please, give me a concrete reason why Christianity is any better than any of the aforementioned religions, or any worse. That's precisely the point. No faith stands out amongst the others. If one faith truly had it all correct, truly had it down, if thousands of years ago,
Yeah.
when these men were riding in their Bronze Age houses, in their palaces, in their little mud huts, wherever, and if they had it truly correct, would it not stand out?
Beautifully put, Jacob. All those dummies living in those mud huts obviously didn't have it correct. But I, as a student here at UT Austin, majoring in history, I am smart enough to tell you that there is no religion that is correct. They're all the same.
Is that
Sir,
what my argument
that's
is?
an incredible truth claim. All right? So my question to you is, why are you so convinced that all those dummies in those mud huts around the world are wrong, but you, as a history major at UT Austin, are correct? Why are you so confident of that, Jacob?
Well, you see, by going by your logic, it would seem that my argument makes no sense. Why is it that me as a freshman who hasn't even spent more than a few years of my life studying these issues, why am I correct, whereas all of the people in the past, the so-called dummies in the mud huts,
Yeah, that's what you said. You talked about the dummies in the mud huts.
Did I call
I
them
didn't-
dummies?
No, you didn't say dummies. You said all those ignorant, basically, people in those mud huts. I'm not.
Yeah.
He talked about people in mud huts.
I talked about
very clearly.
I did.
He did. Thank you, Jacob, for your honesty.
Please,
Thank you.
Please explain
All
to me
those
the
people in those
negative
mud huts who
consequence.
thought that way, obviously, I know they're wrong.
You
Wow,
and I seem to have
Jacob.
different connotations around mud huts. I
Yeah, you
said
better
mud
believe
huts,
it.
and
For
I
a
also
UT
said
Austin student to
palaces.
talk about those people in mud huts, we got a problem. You and I have a real problem.
You know, mud
You
as
are
a
so
construction
elitist, it's
material,
scary.
it is quite underrated. Mud is fantastic. It keeps the
Oh yeah,
cold
Jacob,
in
that's
and the
what you
hot
meant,
out.
right? You meant all those sharp, intelligent folks who live in mud huts.
Quite frankly, I meant it as a sign of admiration.
Oh,
As a sign of admiration.
come on,
please,
Jacob.
Let me explain.
I need to move on from the mud huts. Keep going. It's time for
But to end on the issue of mud huts, I can see, yes, I did say it in a way that would indicate negative
All right.
connotation, and
Thanks
I
for your honesty.
apologize for
man, I like your honesty.
interpretation of
Thank
that.
you. All right. Now, Jacob, please let me jump in.
Okay.
Let's be real clear. You're making a truth claim that all the religions of the world have it incorrect. That you are correct, that all religions are the same. That
That
God is not a
is
he,
not
God
my
is not a
argument.
she. You said God is not a he, a she, and it, a they. You said that God is everything. Here's my problem with that. If it is true that God is everything, that you're part of God and I'm part of God, why is it wrong for me to hit you? Why is it wrong for me to murder you? I'm just part of God. Murdering part of God. Nothing wrong with that. I'm part of God, and if I choose to love you and feed you, or if I choose to murder you, one's not right, the other's not wrong. Why? Because we're both, as you said, we're both part of God. So what you do, you see, when you say everything is part of God, you wipe out the basis for being able to distinguish between justice and injustice,
Did I
good
say
and
that?
evil.
Did I say that though? Did I
No,
say
you
that
did
we're
not
all
say
part
that.
of
You
God?
didn't
No.
say that.
You didn't say
I didn't
You did
say
not say
that.
that.
We're all, but may I?
No, I'm not finished.
Okay.
All right, I listen to you. Now, please respect me enough to listen to me, okay? Fair enough? You did not say that. I'm saying when anybody says, everything is part of God, you wipe out the basis for the understanding of the distinction between good and evil. Why? Adolf Hitler's part of God. Mother Teresa is part of God. You can't say that Hitler did evil and Mother Teresa did good. They're all part of God. That's my point. You said you were agnostic. Let me tell you why you can't be agnostic.
Okay.
You have to, I'm talking intellectually, you have to answer the question, why is human life valuable? You have no choice but to answer the question and live out, why is a human life valuable? Secondly, you have no option. You're going to have to answer the question, is there a purpose to life? Thirdly, you're going to have to answer the question, what ethics am I going to embrace, and why do I embrace the ethics I do? And fourthly, you're going to have to go to funerals, so you're going to have to ask the question, is there life after death or not? And you can't keep on saying, I don't know, I'm agnostic. I don't know, I'm agnostic. I don't know, I'm agnostic. Because you got to live your life. And you're going to have to treat a person as if they're valuable or as if they're a piece of dirt. You're going to have to treat a person as if there's a meaning and purpose to life or as if there's no meaning and purpose to life. You're going to have to treat a person understanding goodness and justice and compassion, or you're going to have to live your life and treat people as if there's no such thing as goodness, compassion, and justice. And guess what, bud? When you go to a funeral, you're going to have to ask the question, by gollies, is there anything after this thing? Or do we all head it to the dustbin? You have no option. And guess what, Jacob? You're a good thinker. So you know very well that you're not agnostic. You can't just keep on saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Because like it or not, life forces you, Jacob, to answer those basic 4 fundamental questions. Why is human life valuable? Why is my life valuable? Is there a meaning and purpose to life, or is there no meaning and purpose to life? What ethics am I going to embrace? And what's the evidence that the ethics I embrace, whatever they are true? And by gollies, what happens after death? Is there maybe life after death, or is that stupidity? You see why you cannot be agnostic?
So then let's go through those questions one by one then, shall we? Number 1, is human life valuable?
Yeah?
I don't know. You see, I don't know if it's valuable. To me, it's valuable, but who am I? Who are you? Who are we?
Good.
Is
But
there
why
a-
have you concluded that life is valuable? What's your evidence that life is valuable?
Do I have evidence? I just have my own non-objective views. I think it's valuable just because that's how I contextualize it.
Good. But then what you have to acknowledge is, if tomorrow you conclude life is not that valuable, you're not wrong. It's just all a taste. Do you like broccoli or do you like spaghetti? Maybe today I like broccoli more, maybe tomorrow I like spaghetti more. It's all relative. So maybe you like to love people today, but if tomorrow you choose to hate people, nothing wrong with that. It's all just a choice.
Precisely.
Good. Good to talk with you, man. You're consistent.